foreign ministers of BRICS in Rio de Janeiro. The upcoming meeting under the Brazilian chairmanship will be a great opportunity for a substantive and in-depth discussion of topical issues on the international agenda, crisis and conflict resolution, as well as prospects for improving the system of global governance with a focus on enhancing the role of the world majority states. The ministers will review the implementation of the agreements reached by the leaders of the association, as well as outline further steps to develop strategic partnership in the context of preparation for the 17th BRICS Summit, which will also take place in Brazil on July 6th and 7th. Within the upcoming ministerial meeting, there will be a session with the participation of the BRICS partner member states foreign ministers with the theme of the role of the Global South in strengthening multilateralism. I'd like to recall that the decision to establish the category of partners was taken at the BRICS Summit in October of last year in Kazan under Russia's chairmanship. And on the 30th of April, Sergei Lavrov, within his visit to the Latin American region, will visit the Dominican Republic. This year we celebrate the 80th anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic relations with this country. The visit is also timed to coincide with the opening of the embassy of the Russian Federation in the Dominican Republic. There are plans for meetings with the president of this country, with the Minister of Foreign Affairs. During the talks with the Dominican partners, we're expected to discuss the prospects for the development of bilateral cooperation, including the intensification of political dialogue, building up cooperation in trade and economic investment, tourism, cultural and humanitarian areas, as well as strengthening the legal framework. Sides will also consider topical issues on the global and regional agenda. Tomorrow, on April 25th, in the Alexandrovsky Garden, there will be a solemn ceremony of laying flowers and wreaths at the tomb of the unknown soldiers with the participation of the Foreign Diplomatic Corps accredited in Moscow. This will be one of the central events organized by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for foreign diplomats in the year of celebration of the 80th anniversary of the victory in the Great Patriotic War. This commemorative action will unite representatives of all regions of the globe and show that despite the attempts to rewrite history, the memory of the events of those years is carefully preserved and cherished throughout the world. Now for the current agenda, the situation around Ukraine. Every day, every hour, every second, it becomes more and more clear to us the lack of commitment on the part of the Zelensky regime following the sabotage of the 30-day moratorium on strikes on energy infrastructure facilities, which we have repeatedly talked about during our briefings, proving it with facts. And I would like to recall that the Ukrainian armed forces have violated this moratorium 136 times, and the Kyiv regime also disrupted the 30-hour Easter truce announced by the Russian president. Let me recall Easter, the holy day. First, Zelensky rejected this proposal of the Russian side on the truce during Easter celebration, and then, probably under the pressure from his Western curators, who continue to supply him arms, that at least for show it would be good to show constraint. He supported this proposal, but only in words. According to the Russian Defense Ministry data, over 30 hours, 4,900 violations were recorded. In addition to thousands of artillery shellings, they used 90 drones, fired missiles from the American multiple rocket launcher system HIMARS on the Kursk region. It seems that he's doing it on purpose, and he's trying to put the US under fire using their own arms during the Easter celebrations. The targeted attacks on Russian civilian objects in the Belgorod, Bryansk, Kursk, and Kherson regions, the DPR, Crimea, were cynical after the targeted strikes by neo-bandits in the village of Nichaevka in Belgorod region. A woman and two minor girls were wounded. Donetsk and Gorlovka were shelled, including with cluster shells of 155mm caliber. 3 civilians were wounded. All these was accompanied by demonic remarks in Ukrainian social media. Just take a look. On the morning of April 20th this year, as a result of one of the AFU strikes, a fire broke out. And by the conspirators of the Kiev regime's crimes was referred to as the descent of the blessed fire. The Russian army has faithfully observed the Easter truce. Numerous facts of terrorism on the part of the AFU militants on the Easter holiday, which is celebrated by the world's Christians, have once again demonstrated Zelensky's complete lack of commitment and his lack of clear conscience. They've lost all control. These gangs of mercenaries, they don't even understand who they answer to anymore. And they aim to fully escalate this war. And the picture of the obscurantism reigning in Ukraine was complemented by the footage of men fleeing from the holy service, from the visiting Dudalov's military commissars, and all of this is taking place in Ukraine. Seized by the schismatics, half-empty churches of the canonical church. This is the real picture of Easter in Ukraine 2025. I'd like to recall that the militants in those churches, where they try to seize the last men in Ukraine and to drag them not just to the fighting fields but to the graves. They also consecrated the unmanned aerial vehicles, as well as receiving blessings for crimes against civilians. I believe this is a complex picture. It's not just one side of it that doesn't coincide with the full picture. It's all the same. On the other crimes of the Kiev regime, Ukraine Nazis, even outside the Easter truce, continued their targeted hunting of civilians in Russian regions, including women and children. In Belgorod region on April 16th, in the village of Malomihailovka, because of the explosion of a Kolokolchik mine planted by the Bendrovites, a 10-year-old boy was killed. On April 21st this year, in the Dolgoe village, as a result of a drone attack on a residential house, a woman was wounded and a civilian was injured by a drone. On April 22nd this year, in Kasilova village, a UAV attacked a car, injuring a married couple, their 16-year-old daughter and 19-year-old son. On April 16th this year, in Donetsk, after a drone attack, a girl born in 2017 was injured. And in Yelenovka settlement, an employee of the federal state enterprise Novorossiya Railways was injured on April 18th this year. In the Volodarskaya settlement, a boy born in 2015 was killed. In Gorlovka, in the cemetery, due to the detonation of an explosive object, a man was killed. On April 22nd, 7 more residents of the DPR were injured, including a 14-year-old girl. In the Bryansk region, on April 17th, the Ukrainian armed forces shelled the Orthodox Church chapel in the village of Zernovo, completely destroying it. Of course, what kind of Easter truce could we be talking about for Zelensky? It's as if the clock has stricken for the evil forces. On April 18th this year, 2 self-defense fighters were killed as a result of a UAV dropping an explosive device. And as a result of attacks by a few drones, including attacks on civilian vehicles, 3 civilians were wounded. Evidence was obtained on the shooting by a few fighters of civilians in the town of Krasnogorovka, DPR, before its liberation by the Russian military in September 2024. A criminal case was opened over the murder of AFU fighters in January 2025 of 3 family members of a resident of the farm of Kolmakov, Kursk region. Russian military investigators have identified Ukrainian AFU commanders involved in the massive drone attack on Kursk on April 15 this year. This is the commander of the 14th Separate Regiment of Unmanned Aerial Systems, Dmitry Bondarovich, commander of the 383rd Separate Brigade of Unmanned Aerial Systems of the Air Force, Andrei Zany, and his deputy Vitaly Zinzuk. They are suspected of committing the aforementioned terrorist act, and of course they will have to pay for all the aforementioned crimes. Russian courts continue to sentence Ukrainian neo-Nazis and mercenaries for their war and other crimes. Court of the DPR has convicted in person the fighters from the neo-Nazi Azov unit, an organization recognized as terrorist and extremist and banned in Russia. So, a court order was given to Andrei Yaroshnitsky and Dmitry Gnatsenko. The investigation established that in March 2022, in Mariupol, they together with their fellow soldiers, Andrei Barshek and Yuri Dmitriev, in fulfillment of an illegal order of the command, fired at least 200 shots from a mortar at a granary where civilians were hiding, and they were aware of that. As a result, one person was wounded. Ruchka and Yaroshnevsky each received 24 years in a strict regime colony. Ignatanek 23 years and 9 months. Earlier, Barsky and Dmitriev were sentenced in absentia to 24 and 24.5 years of imprisonment and were put on the international wanted list. Earlier detained by Russian servicemen, Alexander Chmil was sentenced to 16 years in prison for committing acts of terrorism. On August 27, 2024, in the village of Zhurovly, Kursk region, he mined roads, prevented the evacuation of civilians, and carried out acts of intimidation with the use of weapons. 15 years in prison were given to Ukrainian militant Sergei Yermeyev, who was captured in September 2024. He repeatedly opened fire on civilians and Russian servicemen near the village of Vetrino in Kursk region, as well as prevented the evacuation of residents and mined roads. 15 to 16 years in prison for committing terrorist acts were given to the fighters of the 92nd Separate Assault Brigade of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, Sergei Safronov, Yaroslav Mazur, Dmitry Gorenko, and Kirill Komarov. In August 2024, they illegally entered Russia in armored personal carriers and fired on our military and local residents, as well as mined roads. All 4 were detained by Russian servicemen. 14 and 14.5 years in prison in absentia were given to British and Georgian mercenaries Joseph Philip MacDonald and Gia Saliani, and both are on the international wanted list. The criminal case of the previously detained on the territory of the LPR, a mercenary from Australia, Sir Oscar Charles Augustus Jenkins. And what has this been supported by the Western aid? The West continues military and financial pumping on Kyiv. The nomenclature of weapons, which Germany is going to supply to the Ukrainian armed forces within the framework of its recently announced package worth 3 billion euros. All this considering the catastrophic economic situation in Germany. We're talking about 300 guided missiles, 100 radars, 15 Leopard tanks, 300 reconnaissance UAVs, 25 infantry fighting vehicles, 14 artillery pieces. And on top of all of that, about 100,000 artillery shells. Sweden is also increasing its military aid to Ukraine, the 19th and largest range of $1.6 billion since February 2022 was announced. Recently, it became apparent that Sweden had started transferring 2 reconnaissance planes ASC-890 that it has in stock. One of them has allegedly already arrived in the country and made test flights over the Lvov region on April 21st, 22nd this year. As far as we can judge, it is meant to be used in combination with F-16 fighters. Norway plans to increase military aid to Kyiv this year by $4.6 billion to $7.8 billion. The money will be used to purchase air defense equipment, artillery shells, UAVs, to strengthen Ukraine's military-industrial complex and build up its naval capabilities. Within the framework of the so-called coalition of capabilities led by Oslo and London, the Danish government is preparing to allocate in 2025-2026 a 25th package of aid worth $960 million. $216 million for Ukraine military needs by the end of this year will be supplied by Lithuania. They've tried to gather everything they could. In its turn, the Latvian Defense Ministry is going to transfer several hundreds of reconnaissance UAVs worth 20 million euros in the near future. All these clearly testifies to the hopeless desire of the European hawks to help Kyiv change the situation on the ground in its favor. They're at a dead end, their dialects, but doing something different means recognizing the defeat of the war ideologies, and they are frightened by the obvious prospect of a Russian victory. In order to avoid such a scenario, they encouraged the Zelensky regime to continue fighting regardless of casualties, because it's the Ukrainian citizens who are dying. And it's not just Oslo, London, Tallinn, Riga, Paris, Rome, Madrid who have no care for them. It's their own president who doesn't care about them at all. And the Kyiv regime diplomacy has woken up. We've paid attention to the next escapades of the scandalously famous ex-ambassador of Ukraine in Berlin. He was already kicked out, and now he is a permanent representative in the UN, Andriy Melnik. And despite moving to New York, he continues to provide business advice to the future German government on the scale of assistance to Kyiv. On April 19th this year, in an interview with the German newspaper, he stated that Zelensky's regime is capable of waging war until 2029 if Germany transfers to the AFU 30% of its military equipment, including long-range Taurus missiles. He also expects the legislators to provide annual allocation of 0.5% of the German GDP, worth about 86 billion euros. And the EU with the G7, according to Ukrainian permanent representative, allocate about 550 billion euros, confiscate Russian assets, and provide Kyiv with security guarantees, accession to NATO and the EU, and so on. You see, perhaps he should see a doctor, not the UN, about this. But this is great characteristics and the clear picture of what is taking place on Bankovaya. They understand perfectly that they should just intimidate the Western curators with something and the money will flow. So this is the tactics that they are using here. Here's why the hunger of the Bankova increases to the West's military and financial assistance. With their dream of defeating Russia on the battlefield, now they don't even recall the battlefield. Just take a look at what is taking place of the world diplomacy. On April 23rd, the second round of consultations of US representatives with their British, French, and German counterparts as well as a delegation from Kyiv on the Ukrainian crisis in London. Actually, they reported that these were supposed to be consultations not just on the crisis, but on its resolution. According to Western media reports, they were supposed to discuss a certain plan, 7-point plan, designed to open the way to a peaceful settlement. The day before, Zelensky, speaking frankly, just refused to make any concessions, stating that on legal non-recognition of Crimea as part of Russia, and he demonstratively expressed his desire to negotiate only a ceasefire, and only on his own terms. This approach by Kyiv's regime once again demonstrated its irresponsibility to reach an agreement, its lack of commitment, desire to continue fighting without regard for any casualties until the last Ukrainians.
Чего им считать?
Why should they? Why should they count the victims? Zelensky doesn't consider his own citizens as humans. We've seen it on the example of the peoples of Donbass, and now same logic is applied to their own citizens. It's not his money, he's never earned it. This money is supplied to him in exchange for natural resources of Ukraine and the lands of Ukraine. But again, it's not Zelensky who created these lands. After such comments, Marco Rubio and Stephen Witkoff were forced to cancel their participation in the meeting. Head of the Foreign Office of the UK, as well as foreign ministers of Germany and France, followed suit. As a matter of fact, Zelensky derailed the London round of consultations, which testified to the Kyiv's intention to derail the peace process at any price. It's exactly what they did with the Minsk agreement. It's exactly what they did with the 30-day moratorium on strikes against energy infrastructure. That's how they derailed peace talks in spring 2022, and that's how they undermined the Easter truce. Now let's turn to the Western media. They continue to publish materials about what's really happening in Ukraine. On the 16th of April, The Economist concluded that monopolization of power by Zelensky is happening in Ukraine. Well, it's better too late than never. They stress that Zelensky, who usurped power, and his assistants don't want to share power neither with the government nor with the parliament. Now I would like to ask Western journalists who suddenly have some suspicions, and previously, what do you think his plans were? It was not about democracy that he agreed with Biden. When Biden traveled to Ukraine and led sessions of the government, none of Western journalists even asked a question about democracy and the rule of law. They didn't want to know what sort of example the US Democrats were showing to the Ukrainians. Was it not a beginning of usurping the power in Ukraine? Wasn't it a mocking of law? No, the Western journalists applauded back then. It was a great picture according to them. They also applauded to the way the war was usurped during the Maidan events. They applauded when local authorities' promises were destructed by those who the West financed. All of this led to an anti-constitutional coup d'etat. And now, all of a sudden, Western journalists come to their senses and ask themselves why the power is being usurped by Zelensky. Why don't they find a single fact of how democracy is applied in Ukraine? Why don't they find a single evidence of how rule of law was supported with the help of the West? Now, Western media stress that those who demonstrate independence and have major support of the population, have direct contact to Western officials, were either fired by Zelensky and his assistants, or their power was reduced. And what was the situation before, when the legitimate president of Ukraine, well, remember the Maidan events, the elected president was outlawed, and it was done upon insistence of the West, and it was jubilated by the Western media, and it was to make sure that Yushchenko comes to power during the third round of elections. And now remember the second round of Maidan, which was the last one for Ukraine and its then borders. Remember how the crowd, paid by the Western money, demanded that the legitimately elected president and legitimately elected power and law enforcement agencies are stopped. Where were the Western journalists back then? We see that Zelensky, who is losing power, tries to defend his power and cleans the political field from potential competitors. His office plans to pass through Verkhovna Rada a bill that would limit the power of city mayors to 2 cadences, which may dismiss the mayors of Kiev, Odessa, Dnepropetrovsk, and other major cities. Thus, the Zelensky regime tries to establish total control over local authorities, preparing himself for possible political upheaval. I would like to remind those in Ukraine who is still capable of reasoning, remember how negotiators visited Ukraine. What happened to the Ukrainian negotiators? Some of them were simply killed. The president's office decided to prolong the mobilization in Ukraine until the 7th of August. And in order to fuel Russophobia, Zelensky declared another set of sanctions against 18 entities and 130 physical persons of Russia. Who needs it? How can it help him or Ukrainian citizens in addressing their problems? They are forced to present some sort of activities and pretend to keep themselves busy. Later, I will say who should be on that list, but now I'll say who was included on that list for unclear reasons. I take, for example, Alexander Zlotkov or Arina Sharapova or Andrei Norkin or Iskander Husamov. And talking about entities, it is the International Civic Movement, Other Ukraine, or Tavria TV broadcaster. But it wasn't enough for Zelensky. On the 18th of April, he imposed restrictions against 20 more figures of domestic culture and sports. Now artist Yuri Kuklachev is under sanctions, as well as singers Yaroslav Dronov, Nikolai Rustogorev, Alexander Rosenbaum, Garik Sukachev, and actors such as Alexander Pankratov-Chorny, Yevgeny Mironov, Irina Apeximova, Oskar Kuchera, Vitaly Gogunsky, Nikita Zhigorda are under sanctions, as well as head of the Russian Academy of Ballet, Nikolai Tsiskaridze, and ballet star Sergei Polunin, a raper, athletes, boxers, gymnasts. On that same day, Zelensky imposed sanctions against 39 Russian scientists and business people. Those are the people who particularly stand in the way of Zelensky's office. Who should be on top of the list of those who really threaten the peoples of Ukraine? On top of that list should be Zelensky himself. He is who is truly destroying and eliminating the peoples of Ukraine. Commenting the sanctions by Zelensky, Alexander Rosenbaum called them a manifestation of a strike of allergy against everything that is Russian. Ukraine presidential office tries to ban the Russian language and culture and destroy and eliminate the Russian world. That's what they are trying to do. But they fail in doing so because the Russian language is used, Russian books are read, Russian films are watched. The president's office is simply afraid by the fact that the Russian language is used increasingly often in Ukraine. Our songs and our music is listened to and is sung increasingly often. They watch films shot in Russia. What do they fear in Ukraine? That people start coming to their senses? Well, but you, Mr. Zelensky, you kill them, so what do you fear more? That people come to their senses, or that you are out of people because they are under life threat in Ukraine? And in the year when we celebrate the 80th anniversary of the great victory, Zelensky builds up his efforts to fight against the heroes of the Great Patriotic War. They continue to fight monuments. Yesterday, on the 23rd of April, there were reports about a destruction in Lvov on the Mars field of a mass grave of Soviet soldiers who fell during the liberation of that very city from German fascists in July 1944. That mass grave was where remains of over than 1,500 soldiers and officers of the Red Army rested. I think it was the top of immorality. What can be next? Officially, the Lvov authorities called these blasphemous actions, I quote, the work on exhumation. It was decided to carry out those works with an excavator and other heavy equipment. We feel the signature, the style of Banderovites. They couldn't win on the battlefield, but they invented a mean way to take revenge on our fighters after their death. But he'll pay for it. These facts once again demonstrate and prove the relevance of the special military operation aimed at denazification and demilitarization of Ukraine and eliminating the threats emanating from its territory. All the goals set by the leadership of our country will be achieved. In order to state the real picture and in order to steer the work of the international organization, there should be a secretariat that should be unbiased, that shouldn't take any side in the conflict. It should carry out its functions. But what is it? What are its functions? It is to fulfill its mandate in accordance with the Charter. The organization should contribute to the work of the organization on the ground to make sure the institutions can perform their work. I'm talking about the UN and its Secretariat. Are they doing it in a systemic and consistent way? Unfortunately, the UN Secretariat, starting from the times of the anti-constitutional coup d'etat in Kiev in 2014, has been consistently pursuing the policy of double standards with regards to the events in Ukraine. We haven't heard from the representatives of the UN authorities, I'm talking about the Secretariat, any criticism against Maidan authorities when throughout 8 years the Kiev regime waged a true war against the citizens of eastern Ukraine, which back then belonged to Ukraine. The UN never called for a direct dialogue between Kiev and Donbass that was required by the UN Security Council Resolution 2202 that endorsed the package of measures to implement the Minsk agreements. No Secretariat representatives tried to do their utmost in order to call the parties for implementation of the Minsk agreements and state the obvious failure to implement the failure of certain countries, primarily the Kiev regime, to implement on the obligations. The UN was biased and they kept silent about violations of fundamental rules of international humanitarian law, including the use of peaceful civilians as a human shield and placement of military equipment and fire positions in residential areas, as well as attempts to torture war prisoners and civil population. Sometimes, when it was not possible to interpret such actions in any other way, the UN Secretariat pointed to some sorts of violations of the international humanitarian law. Well, it's so easy not to call things by their proper name. The UN Secretariat tried to demonstrate its equidistance, and sometimes it voiced the calls for restraint to all parties of the conflict. It was in a situation when children were killed. They called for an independent investigation and bringing those responsible to justice, but they stressed they didn't have proved information and evidence about which side was responsible for the shellings. But they accused Russia of what it had never done on a regular basis, and in those cases they have enough of facts and emotions. Look at this situation. When the staged events took place in Bucha, when the tragic events in the rail station in Kramatorsk happened in April 2022, or when civilians were evacuated from Azovstal in May 2022, or when a terrorist attack happened on the Crimean Bridge in October 2022, where the world was witnessing the inhumane crimes of the Kiev clique against the civilian population in the Kursk region after the incursion of the armed forces in Ukraine in August 2024, or when Russian journalists were killed. The UN Secretariat didn't utter a word. They ignored the staged events in Bucha. Quite on the contrary, they said Russia was to blame. But when it was obvious that the terrorist attacks against the Crimean Bridge, where civilians were driven, where civilians were killed, it was obvious that the Kiev regime was to blame. The UN Secretariat preferred not to notice it. There were many crimes that the UN Secretariat kept silent about. The UN Secretariat eagerly participate in information campaigns against our country. On a regular basis, do we see that the Russian side is accused of allegedly deliberate strikes against civilian and energy infrastructure of Ukraine. Let me give you a fresh example. It was a comment by the press secretary of the UN Secretary General, Mr. Dujarric, about the April events in the city of Sumy. He spoke about a series of attacks against Ukrainian towns that led to victims among civilian population and large-scale devastations. On political aspects, the UN demonstrates the same attitude. In particular, Secretary General made a series of biased assessments regarding the expression of their will by the population of the Zaporozhye and Kherson regions and the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics. According to Guterres, the decision to annex the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics, as well as Zaporozhye and Kherson oblasts, will have no legal force, and it deserves, according to him, any sort of accusation and condemnation.
These people remember what was done to their great-fathers and great-grandfathers. This is a people who suffered from Badavits after World War II. Now they fight neo-Nazism for their own survival and made attempts to destroy people who have both conscience and memory. We are confused by the selective approach of Secretary Guterres and other high officials of the organization to citing the terms of the UN Charter. Current officials forget that their role is to be the guardians of the principles of the Charter in all its fullness, entirety, and interconnectedness. The principle of the territorial integrity that they regularly put forward, according to the consensus, I'll tell you one more time, consensus declaration on principles of the international law of 1970, is applied only to countries whose government respect the principle of self-determination and thus represent the whole population living on the particular territory. It is clear that following the coup d'etat, the Kiev regime do not meet this criteria. Zelensky and his predecessors laugh at it. They laugh that they have to represent the whole population of Ukraine and to ensure rights of the whole population. Language rights, social rights, human rights. They cannot select those who can or cannot speak their native language. As to the new realities around the Ukrainian crisis, the UN representatives support shyly the Russia-US dialogue on the settlement of the crisis, but they do not see or hear that how Zelensky abuses the proposals on truce, moratoriums. The Secretariat yet again say that they want to contribute to the possible negotiations between Moscow and Kiev if, I quote, there's demand from both sides. But if Zelensky continues to behave the way he does now, then the Secretariat is not going to support the negotiations and is going to go back to the narratives of the Westerners about the battlefield and so on. I'll tell you one more time, the UN officials, in a manner traditional to them that has shaped in the recent years, selectively interpret the principle of the territorial integrity of Ukraine in particular. They constantly forget that all of it should be cited and implemented in its entirety and interconnectedness with respecting the rights of peoples who live on this territory. It is clear to us that the behavior of General Secretary and his employees contradict the essence of the spirit of Article 100 of the UN Charter, demanding from the employees of the UN Secretariat to abstain from all actions that could influence their position as international officials who are responsible only to the organization. They also contradict Article 97 of the UN Charter that enshrines this role as the main administrative official of the organization. But these functions do not give the General Secretary the right to make biased political statements on the behalf of the whole organization and interpret the norms of the Charter and documents of the General Secretary. Again and again, Secretary Guterres and his employees abuse their authority and de facto join in the anti-Russian front. It is said that the UN employees prefer to be mouthpieces of the Western propaganda and participate in putting pressure on member states. They should be guided by the spirit of the UN Charter. Amid this, there's no talking about potential mediatory role of the Secretariat. It's strange. It is strange. We talked about the Western support. It is done by the NATO countries because it is there where this logic emerged. And the plan to implement this aggression emerged there. But let us talk in greater details about the alliance. All the current activities of NATO is aimed at countering Russia and amplification of their influence to the regions of the world where NATO member states, there are no NATO member states to stir up the situation. They essentially came back to the ideology of the Cold War and built up their military presence on the eastern and northern wings. Close to our borders, there's relevant infrastructure. Their priority is the preparation to thwart the so-called Russian threat. We know that it provides for military exploration of territories of NATO member states bordering Russia, the preparation to hostilities, establishment of armament depots, and so on. They do not even hide it. Those are not reconnaissance data. That's what they say as an action plan. For example, in the NATO member state close to Russia, there's deployment of military tactical group. They transfer armies and equipment to the eastern wing. They deploy military contingent of European countries close to our western borders in the Baltic Sea, the Black Sea region. Here, there are more than 100,000 American soldiers and specialists. About 20,000 were additionally sent there since 2022. They develop air defense systems. They talked about the deployment of American middle-range missiles. In summer 2024, we see a potential of the ballistic air defense of NATO building up on January 14, 2025, during the so-called regional NATO summit. We heard statements about the new mission of the alliance, Baltic Sentry. We talked about it already. I'll remind you, it is aimed at, yet again, no one is hiding it, at protecting critical infrastructure. At the same time, they will try to achieve the control of navigation in the Baltic Sea with the stress of the so-called shadow fleet that ostensibly used by Russia. NATO strives to claim military superiority in the Arctic as well. There's about 50 military infrastructure facilities of Russia, of the US, Canada, Denmark, Norway, Iceland. There's active military exploration of the alliance of the territories of new member states, Finland and Sweden. These countries host joint events with armed forces of NATO states. We're talking about the Finland that we peacefully have worked with for decades. We had a lot of plans, from interstate big projects to border cooperation. But this is it. The NATO's get even to this potentially peaceful state. It is pumped with everything, with Russophobia and armament. In July 2024, on the sidelines of the NATO summit in Washington, the ICE-Pact icebreaker collaboration was signed between Canada, the US, and Finland. They developed the coalition potential of the monitoring of the situation in the region with special stress to watching the Russian Northern Fleet. They plan to open 8 radio location stations on the territory of Norway. There's greater scale and number of exercises of the alliance and their member states, with scenarios not only of defensive but of offensive character as well. And Russia is openly called an enemy. In 2024, more than 1,000 exercises took place. They took place from January through June 2024, and Steadfast Defender 2024 became the largest since the Cold War. In a number of exercises united by one aim, which is to counter an equal enemy in the eastern wing. With firing and bombing, about 90,000 people were involved. They took place on the territories, waters, and airspace of majority of European NATO member states. They were also training to transfer soldiers from the US through the territory of Europe to the Russian borders. In 2025, the intensity of the military preparation of NATO keeps up. The major exercises took place on the territory of Bulgaria and Romania, January 13, February 26, Norway, February 4 to 8 in the Mediterranean, March 3 to 14th. There's plan to have exercises in the Baltic states and Poland in April and June, and in the Arctic region. They train scenarios of numerous national and international exercises are focused around the potential confrontation with our country. NATO did not give Europe any added value in terms of stability and security. On the contrary, its geopolitical expansion eastwards led to a military conflict and destruction of architecture of European security. NATO's confrontation with Russia and building up of their military potential create threats to security for us and the whole world. But the situation in Ukraine, provoked by NATO, led to tectonic shifts in economy, food security, information security. Countries, until now, cannot adequately respond to what was created with the hands of the Biden administration and implemented by the Kiev regime. Let's see what's going on right now. What is going on the European continent in its western part? There's more risks of incidents that can turn into a direct military conflict with tragic consequences for Europe and the whole world. And all of it takes place amid rewriting history with a very high rate, and the start of a full-fledged anti-Russian neo-Nazi ideology, as like this genie is consciously is out of the bottle. The NATO imposed the militarization and new dividing lines. This does not contribute to security in Europe. This is to the issue of the topic that we are called aggressors in the Western media. I gave facts of those who indeed militarize and have destructive aims. We talked about Finland. There were a lot of questions. Russia for decades built relations with this country and with population based on mutual respect, pragmatic cooperation. There was political dialogue, trade, cultural exchanges, joint projects in energy and logistics, cross-border trips, millions of them. A lot of families were created, and all of that seems to be a solid foundation of good neighboring. And we had everything for peace and mutual understanding. I remember how former President Niinistö praised, I quote, direct and clear dialogue with Russia, and said that there are no problems in the relations, and we did not have from our side. However, after the start of the special military operation, and Helsinki knows that, was a response to the project provoked by the West to exterminate everything Russian and Russian-speaking people on the territory of Ukraine. After that, Helsinki turned into a mouthpiece of anti-Russian Russophobe campaign. Mr. Niinistö, who once talked about mutually beneficial cooperation, started to talk, I quote, military crimes, aggression, loss of confidence. It turned out that all the good neighboring for the Finnish elite was a forced smile. They ostensibly tolerated the dangerous neighbor because of geography. The new president, Alexander Stubb, a passionate Atlantist, continued this performance. He threatened, quote, support Ukraine until victory. I cannot really tell anything else. He probably talked about the victory of Russia, but he cannot say that directly. He praised Finnish volunteers who went to fight against Russia, or suddenly he says that the Finnish people should morally prepare to restore relations with Russia. Probably the stance of President Stubb was influenced by a game of golf in Mar-a-Lago. In an interview to the Finnish magazine, after the journalist asked to clear the position of Helsinki about the prospects of relations with Moscow, Stubb said that something can be built only peace in Ukraine is settled. But when are they going to start citing Zelensky, who says that he's not going to establish any kind of peace? He's not planning any peaceful process. But Stubb did not talk about it to the Finnish people, but he said that the bilateral relations will never go back to the way they used to be, and accused Russia, you won't believe it, to imperialism that is inherent to it at the gene level. I didn't know that Mr. Stubb, a specialist in genetics, but if he isn't, then he should remember that all those who in the Western Europe talked without talked about it there without special education ended up badly. President of Finland stopped seeing the future of relations with Russia and even doubted the relevance of the bilateral economic cooperation, not because of the European sanctions, but because the economy of Russia, I quote, very small. I would like President Stubb to talk about the size of the economy of the Baltic states, for example, or about the latest news about the economy of Germany and France. What's going on with the economy of Portugal, for example? Where's the logic? You're talking about the language of force, or it's time to restore the relations, or the relations will never be the same. This is not the politics, it's patchwork of populism and the fear before your own voters. Such inconsistency and self-contradictory of the actions of the Finnish leadership in terms of Russia leads to consequences. It is clear that because of the destruction of mutual beneficial cooperation with our country, Finland lost much more than it gained, if it gained anything at all. Security of Finland following after it joined NATO hardly strengthened. On the contrary, the finance burden increased. There's atmosphere of military psychosis. After severing ties with economic ties with Russia, the Finnish people continue to suffer multi-billion losses. And this list of the results of the anti-Russian policy of the current Finnish leadership can go on. The irony is that the Finnish authorities recognize on their own there's little left from the earlier relations. Instead of analyzing their own mistakes, they continue to blame Russia. It's very convenient, and they receive money for this, probably. But this begs the question, who benefits from turning Finland into a base of confrontation? The clear is clear. It's NATO. I talked about it. It is beneficial to those who benefit financially from somebody else's conflicts. Russia. To those who, despite the lessons of history, continues to exploit their superiority. Now about our country. Russia has always been prepared for a dialogue and demonstrated in practical steps this. The dialogue begs for sincerity, non-double standards and provocations. And until the Finnish leadership demonstrates weakness, the only one thing, the weakness in defending their own national interest, it is said that ordinary Finnish people are going to pay for this.
The Japanese militarism, we constantly keep you informed about the facts of crimes for this shameful act in the year of the 80th anniversary of the victory. We have new information on the subject of crimes of Japanese militarism during the Second World War, which, according to most, and as we have repeatedly emphasized, has no statute of limitations. Proceedings to punish all those responsible continue to this day. The Office of the Prosecutor General of the Russian Federation has officially notified of the orders issued in December 2024 and January of this year to revoke the earlier conclusions on the rehabilitation of 10 Japanese citizens. Their names will be posted in the text version of the briefing. These persons are accused of engaging in subversive and espionage activities, as well as committing common crimes. Based on the results of the review of court decisions in cassation and supervisory instances, it has been established that the above persons are not subject to rehabilitation and their guilt has been fully proved. As you know, Myanmar was shaken up by an insane mass-scale event, a powerful earthquake on March 28th. The territory of the Republic was truly shaken up by the earthquake. It has shaken the cities. It was the largest earthquake of the 7.7 magnitude, which caused large-scale destruction of infrastructure and social objects, mainly in Sagaing Administrative Region, Mandalay and Naypyidaw cities. As a result of the earthquake in Myanmar, according to official data, 5,106 people were affected. More than 3,700 people were killed and 129 went missing. According to the Russian embassy in Yangon, among the dead in Mandalay, there is one Russian citizen who worked as a teacher in a local secondary school. By order of the President of Russia within the framework of rendering humanitarian aid to the friendly Myanmar people. 5 Il-76 planes of the Russian emergency services arrived in this country on March 29th and March 21st. 264 people team from Russia came over, which included employees of the Centrospas Air Mobile Unit, Center for Special Risks, Special Operations Leader, canine team, anesthesiologists, and psychologists. Other doctor brigades came over, a team from Emergency Pediatric Surgery and Traumatology Clinic of Dr. Roshel and 4 doctors from the Republic of Kalmykia also arrived in Myanmar. A total of 10 flights were operated by the Russian Emircom to Myanmar, delivering 157.5 tons of humanitarian aid, tents, mobile power plants, foodstuffs, essentials. Medics of the Centrospas detachment resuscitated 2 people who were brought to an air mobile hospital with cardiac arrest. Specialists of the Ministry of Emergency Situations of Russia found and extracted 1 victim alive from under the rubble, as well as 37 dead bodies. 130,000 square meters were surveyed to identify people under the rubble. Doctors of the Field Mobile Hospital provided medical assistance to 508 citizens, including 94 children. 68 surgical operations of varying complexity were performed. Chairman of the State Administrative Council, Prime Minister of the Republic of Myanmar, during his visit to the location of Russian rescuers, expressed his gratitude for the assistance in eliminating the consequences of the earthquake. The work of Russian search and rescue teams was highly appreciated by international organizations, in particular the UN Office of the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. More on the world diplomacy. Today, the world community celebrates the International Day of Multilateralism and Diplomacy for Peace, established by the UN General Assembly Resolution 73/127 on December the 12th, 2018, which was introduced at the initiative of Venezuela. This day is intended to recall the importance of the collective efforts of states to resolve global problems, prevent conflicts, and promote peace. Today's challenges include international terrorism, extremism, drug trafficking, organized crime, cyber threats, information wars, climate change, new pandemics. In order to deal with these threats, which undermine international stability, we have to coordinate action by members of the international community, driven by recognizing their common responsibility for the fate of present and future generations. And here the UN plays a special role in this effort since its foundation. This organization has been a unique and indispensable platform for building interaction between states, thanks to its universal legitimacy, which is unfortunately undermined by the global minority, but it's still holding on thanks to their special competence and maximum representativeness. The UN is able to make contribution to the maintenance of international peace and security, to promote human rights, and the UN Charter is of key importance for the full realization of the potential of world organization. This document is rightly considered the cornerstone of the world order. Of course, it's subject to many efforts of the world minority to undermine it. The UN Charter has been considered the code of conduct for many states in order to provide peaceful and harmonious coexistence, and the postulates of the UN Charter constitute an integral system that must be strictly observed in their entirety, totality, and interrelation. Unfortunately, in recent times, the UN-centric system of international relations is in deep crisis. The reason is in the unilateral actions of certain Western states that believe in their own exclusivity and infallibility. They are increasingly using their advantage in order to push forward their unilateral decisions, trying to mobilize efforts for their destructive endeavors. They've already usurped the secretariat of the organizations, turning it into an agent of the interests of the collective West, and I would like to once again recall, of the world minority. The concept of a so-called rules-based world order is aimed at revising the international legal architecture and creating alternative decision-making mechanisms that bypass the UN. Russia has consistently advocated strengthening multilateralism as a responsible member of the international community, primarily by restoring the authority and central coordinating role of the UN. And the group of friends in defense of the UN Charter occupies an increasingly important place in collective efforts promoting the interests of the world majority, countering Western attitudes. We call on all countries to adhere to multilateralism as an indispensable element of a lasting, just world order, to develop interaction on the principles of equal rights in compliance with the UN Charter. Another important date. Do you remember the legendary meeting of the Soviet and American troops on the Elbe River? And its 80th anniversary will be celebrated tomorrow, on April 25th. It became one of the most important symbols of the defeat of Nazi Germany by the unified forces of the anti-Hitler coalition. It was on this day, making the highest point of combat alliance between our country and the US in World War II, where the soldiers of the two armies shook hands on the damaged bridge near Torgau, the spirit of Elbe. And it's not just a saying, it's a name that speaks for itself. It's a prime example of how Russia and the US can put aside their differences, build on trust and cooperation for a common goal, for the common good goal. And remembering these lessons of the past is especially relevant now when attempts to rewrite history, undo everything Russian, have become a leading trend in some countries of the collective West, of the world minority. But I can assure you that erasing the feat of the Soviet liberating warriors is impossible. We never forget the common aspiration that united our people with Americans during those years of terrible hardship and great loss. We remember, and we always will remember. And against this background, it is encouraging that certain good traditions are being restored. Current American authorities have agreed with the Russian embassy in Washington to a commemorative ceremony on April 25th in honor of the Elbe encounter at the memorial plaque of Arlington Cemetery. Other events are also being worked out in the context of the celebration of the 80th anniversary of the victory together with American veterans. In all this, we see positive difference from the previous US administration. Biden ideology over the last 3 years introduced absolutely unmotivated bans on such contacts, celebrations. I'd also like to draw attention that on April 23rd of this year, in the main building of the Victory Museum, the exhibition Encounter on the Elbe was opened. demonstrating world-renowned photographs of the meeting between the Lieutenant William Robertson, commander of the reconnaissance group, and the platoon commander of the 173rd Rifle Regiment, Lieutenant Silvashko. Museum visitors will be able to see a unique map, Your War, presented by an American officer to Guards officer, which reflects the path of the Allies in Europe towards one another. The exhibition also presents awards, documents, drawings, gifts, souvenirs, weapons, military uniforms of Soviet and American officers that authentically recreate images of soldiers, bringing us back to those minutes and those times when soldiers rejoiced at the joining of the fronts and the soon completion of hostilities in Europe. The exhibition is also followed by fragments of footage, of news footage made by frontline cameramen who were present at those meetings. The exhibition will be open until May 18th. We invite everyone to take a look at it. And of course, we will publish links to the website in the text version of today's briefing. A year ago, we've told you about the volunteer project to create audio guides to concentration camp museums. And to our delight, the initiative is alive and well. We congratulate the initiative group on another success. 70 school kids, students, teachers of German language from 11 cities of Russia, 3 universities, 13 schools, translated into Russian and voiced a documentary film about the concentration camp Dachau, an audio guide to the memorial of the concentration camp Salaspils. They are participants from the Amur and Orenburg regions, Yekaterinburg, Yelts, Lugansk, Moscow, Penza, St. Petersburg, Tambov, Tyumen, and Yaroslavl. The project manager back in the day, Lena Serpionova, drew attention to the fact that there is no Russian translation of the documentary about the concentration camp in the museum. And I'd like to recall that it was in Dachau that more than 4,000 Soviet prisoners of war were brutally shot. And also, in 1944, 92 Red Army soldiers, participants of the camp resistance, who were members of the Fraternal Union of Prisoners of War, were shot. The union organized resistance in various concentration camps, carrying out underground work, rescuing their fellows. The project participants translated and redubbed a movie about Dachau in Russian. The movie is available on a special website, and of course we will publish the link in the text version of the briefing as part of the second project. School students, teachers, translated and dubbed an audio guide to the Salaspils concentration camp memorial in 3 languages, Russian, English, and German versions. The text for the audio guide to the Salaspils memorials based on the materials of historian Vladimir Bogov, who over 10 years researched Nazi atrocities in the concentration camp Salaspils, and not the labor camp as the Nazi supporters referred to it. This was in fact a concentration camp. Vladimir Bogov, through many years, stood against the paradigm of Soviet occupation, which is imposed on society by the Latvian authorities. His widow, director of the Trustworthy History Foundation, compiled the text, passed it over to school kids and teachers for translation and voiceover. The audio guide contains the historian's critical remarks about the modern exposition in Salaspils. We're grateful to all those who are indifferent and involved in the project: school kids, students, teachers, sound engineers, historians, translators. And we hope that your work will carry on, and we will assist you in any way possible. On April 25th, the International Patriotic Action Victory Dictation, under the motto "No to Remember," will be held all over the world. It will be dedicated to the theme of events of the Great Patriotic War. It will be traditionally held at regional sites across Russia and abroad, as well as online at the website diktantpobedi.rf. And of course, all links will be available in the text version of today's briefing. If you don't have time to write the dictation on April 25th, don't worry, it will be available further on the project website. A series of online practice tests to prepare for the dictation is already underway. They will help users to refresh their knowledge and to test their knowledge on the events of the Great Patriotic War. Questions have been compiled by professional expert historians of the Russian Historical Society. Each test has its own theme dedicated to important dates, famous commanders, military operations, and other significant events of the Great Patriotic War. Although, is there something insignificant about the Great Patriotic War? We invite everyone to test their knowledge.
Vietnam.
On the 13th of April, the Vietnamese people and all the friends of Vietnam, including Russia, obviously will celebrate the 50th anniversary of the liberation of the south of this country after the declaration of independence of Vietnam in September 1945. France didn't want to accept it and unleashed the war that ended in 1954 with a shameful defeat. The US targeted the region, and the interference led to a direct military conflict, the most lost and bloody conflict after World War II. During that aggression, the US attacked the disobedient Vietnam. They shelled it and used napalm. Unfortunately, they can't see the consequences. Many people can't see the consequences of the use of this agent. But look it up, and we will provide a link in the verbatim report of this briefing. The Vietnamese people suffered it all, and the consequences of the sadly known defoliant Agent Orange are still suffered by the peoples of Vietnam. Despite the power of the US military machine, the heroic Vietnamese people won that war and defended its right for independence and independent development. We have always took pride in our significant contribution to that victory, restoration of the economy of Vietnam, and in the post-war period, we congratulate our Vietnamese friends. We are happy to see their inspiring success in the economic and social sphere, and the 24th of April will mark the 110th anniversary of one of the most tragic events in the first half of the 20th century, the Armenian genocide of the Ottoman Empire. Russia has always considered the sorrow of the broadly Armenian nation as its own. According to historical records, in 1915, the Caucasus Army of the Russian Imperial Army, at the instruction of Tsar Nicholas II, opened the Russian-Turkish border and saved no less than 350,000 Armenians. Moscow position is well known. It has been consistent and is based on the humanist tradition. In 1915, on the initiative of the Russian diplomacy, the leading participants of international community qualified the events as a crime against humanity. Modern Russia was one of the first ones to recognize the genocide of Armenians in the Ottoman Empire. The State Duma back in 1995 and 2005 adopted rulings condemning the genocide of Armenians in 1915, 1922. In 2015, President of Russia paid a visit to Armenia and participated in the ceremony in commemorating the victims and expressed his sincere sympathy for the Armenian people. Traditionally, many Russian cities, not only Moscow, will host many commemorative events, including representatives not only of Armenian community, but also of peoples of all nationalities. And another announcement, association of the studies named after Gromyko, the McGill University, the Institute for Europe, and the Academy of Governance under the President of Belarus opened the call for applications of young international relations experts from the CIS. original, previously unpublished scientific articles and analytic reports of individual authors or groups of authors aged under 40, dedicated to a wide range of international topics of international relations, are invited to participate, including geopolitical processes and prospects of integration in the post-Soviet space, as well as threats to international security, the role of the UN, and preservation of historic truth and fight against falsification of history. The project is implemented since 2018. The final round will take place on the 23rd and 24th of July. The event will include presentations of analytic reports of young experts and a ceremony of presenting awards. In order to participate, you have to apply until the 16th of May on the official website by attaching the questionnaire and the article. The links will be present in the text of today's briefing. From the 8th to 13th of May, Moscow will host the 10th International Festival of Folk Song entitled Dobrovidение 2025, dedicated to the 80th anniversary of the victory in Great Patriotic War, as many other events. What is Dobrovidение, or good vision, as it may be translated? Who initiated it? It was in May 2014. It was initiated by hero of the Soviet Union, cosmonaut Valentina Tereshkova, people's artist of the USSR and hero of labor of Russia, Iosif Kobzon, and deputy of the State Duma Oleg Nilov. The festival aims to preserve and develop the culture of folk song and at promoting folk traditions and true spiritual and moral values. Year by year, increasingly more artists and ensembles participate. The geography of Dobrovidение covers almost all regions of the Russian Federation and foreign countries, including China, India, Serbia, Moldova, and many other countries, thus contributing to strengthening and developing the cultural ties, not just formally or in an ad hoc manner. Since 2014, this tradition has not only been kept alive, but it has expanded. This year, Dobrovidение will bring together over 1,000 gifted artists from Russia and abroad, and events will take place on the best premises of the Russian capital. The main stage will be the State Kremlin Palace. The State Academic Kuban Cossack Chorus will be there, as well as the State Academic Omsk Russian Folk Chorus and the Academic Russian Folk Chorus named after Pyatnitsky. The first event will be the presentation of awards of the National Award entitled Dobrovidение 2025. On the 9th of May, there will be concerts for participation of the special military operation in hospitals in order to support the fighters of the special military operation. The special project entitled Dobrovidение von Donbass was launched. Concerts were organized at the front line, including in the area of the special military operation. On the 11th of May, participants of Dobrovidение 2025 will present their performances during the Moscow Seasons City Festival. On the 11th of May, Dobrovidение Choir will inaugurate the 10th festival. Folks, choirs, ensembles, soloists, and accordionists will perform. They will perform people's folk songs, as well as popular songs dedicated to the great victory. A TV show will be shot there, and on the 13th of May, in the final day of the festival, a concert will take place in the Hall of Church Assemblies at the Cathedral of Christ the Savior. Dozens of academic choruses and folklore ensembles will perform and show their talent. It is expected to be an important event in the cultural and public life of Moscow and the Russian Federation, and participation of foreign performers will expand cultural ties and serve to the enhancement of inter-civilizational dialogue and strengthen the understanding between the peoples. We invite everybody to participate in the festival. Russian and foreign media are invited by the organizers to cover these concerts. And now I'm ready to take your questions. Is International Live, Международная жизнь with us? Yes, we are here. Ursula von der Leyen recently spoke about a large number of countries who want to cooperate with the EU in the context of an unpredictable global situation. Countries are rowing up in order to work with us. How would you comment on it? Well, it's funny enough that she said that the world is unpredictable. According to her, she's talking about the unpredictable global situation, but who was it who created it? Wasn't it due to her efforts? Wasn't it due to the member states of the EU and NATO member states? Wasn't it them who initiated this bacchanalia in 2014, when with their own hands, well, she comes from Germany, so she may ask her German colleagues how they orchestrated Maidan in Ukraine. First, they provoked an internal Ukrainian crisis. Then they proceeded to impose sanctions, which hit the entire world. And then these sanctions hit themselves too. And it all led to a civil war in Ukraine, and then it all expanded and took a shape of an international conflict. Who is making the world unpredictable? It's her. Now to the great number of countries who allegedly want to cooperate with the EU. As far as I understand, she's talking about trade and economic trends and relations. When talking about the queue of countries engages in wishful thinking. Let me draw specific facts. The EU is not what it used to be some 20 years ago. The reputation of the European Union as a comfortable partner and a reliable jurisdiction for investment and business has been undermined by the EU itself. It is an achievement or an anti-achievement by Madame von der Leyen herself. We see enormous corruption in the EU, despite the common sense. They have abandoned Russian energy sources and other resources at good prices, and testifies to the low reputation of the EU as an economic partner under the guise of fighting climate change. You remember the plans to launch the so-called border correction mechanism, or, for example, the measures to fight deforestation. Those are hidden tariffs. Talking about its role as a safe haven, it is no longer a prerogative of the EU. Its economy has been experiencing a storm for a long time. I can cite many examples, such as decline of industrial production, the enterprises that have been shut down, redeployment of production sites abroad. She is a citizen of Germany, as far as I remember, or at least she has something in common with the Germans. Don't they tell her how they redeploy their plants, their factories abroad. So what sort of a queue is she talking about? It is a queue of EU companies who are queuing in order to re-register their businesses and production sites in other countries as they try to save themselves from an economic collapse in the EU. She can't but know it. She does know it, and she is lying. I think other countries of the EU cannot but notice these realities, and of course they take into consideration as they build their relations with the EU. It's a different thing that they might not know how to exit this situation, which has become possible due to destructive activities of the global minority, which wanted to rule the world. Everyone understands it, and everyone takes it into account when building the relations. In the context of modern-day turbulences, it is obvious for countries to promote the interests of their own businesses and build new production chains and expanding contacts by the countries who want to overcome difficulties created by the EU is something reasonable, but it's not because they are queuing up to engage in cooperation with the EU. EU is no longer considered as a strong and reliable partner, as Ursula von der Leyen is saying, but it is a transit point. Well, let's look at the figures. The share of BRICS countries in terms of purchasing power parity in the last year already exceeded the indicators of the G7 by 7%. So what conclusions can we draw? What sort of a queue is she talking about? They just don't want to present evidence because evidence doesn't substantiate what their declarations. And a second question, if I may. On the 18th of April, in Kiev, an exchange of diplomatic notes took place between representatives of Japan and Ukraine regarding the allocation, or rather a provision of 500 billion yen in terms of a loan that should be paid off from special incomes that would proceed from the governance of frozen assets by the West, by the frozen Russian assets, the assets that were frozen by Western countries. How would you comment on it? Well, we already mentioned it, that even technical role in performing such activities will be considered by Russia as participation and involvement in the theft. Apparently, allegedly, they are not talking about the capital itself, but the interest that is not under the Japanese jurisdiction, and according to them, the Japanese loan only amounts to 6% of the G7 package that was negotiated in October 2025. On that very day, on the 18th of April, Tokyo expressed in a cynical way a hope that these actions will not negatively impact the relations with Russia. Well, I beg your pardon, if they really think that they can serve two masters, they are wrong. We have to state that inevitably it will negatively impact the relations with Russia. We consider such a step as an extremely hostile and treacherous. It is unacceptable, neither legally nor for human considerations. Probably Tokyo wants to enhance the debt to our country by 500 billion yens, probably. And if they provide the profit to the Kiev regime, it will be considered by our country as involvement in the crimes committed by the Kiev regime, and it will entail practical countermeasures, including asymmetric countermeasures, and it will inevitably impact the Russian-Japanese relations, for which the Japanese government will be to blame. Thank you. Is Ria Novosti here with us? Yes, good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. We have two questions today, if we may. The first, yes, we do recognize each other. That's good. I have two questions, if I may, and the first question is as follows. Yesterday, Mr. Rusnak arrived to Russia in order to collect secret information regarding the plans of the Russian leadership. Those who are involved in the foreign political activities with regards to Moldova in the context of hostile politics of Chisinau, how can you assess these activities, and will the ambassador of Moldova be summoned to Russia?
You used the wording of my answer. It's true, and this is a manifestation. Those are actions that were thwarted by the security services of Russia, and the form of diplomatic response to such actions are defined given all the consequences. When we have the information that we can share, we'll do it. The official Chisinau constantly, without any grounds, accused Russia in interference into internal affairs of Moldova. We see how pro-government media in Moldova spread spy stories around our embassy. 3 weeks ago, 3 employees of our diplomatic mission were expelled, so we responded in kind, and now it turns out that Moldovan special services collect data on the territory of our country. This proves that what Sandra does, she does on purpose to sabotage between our countries and to make the lives of their citizens more difficult, to rewrite history of our countries, our common history. This is one more example. Thank you very much. I have question two, of course, about Moldova again. On April 22, authorities in Moldova de facto demonstrated that yet again they distanced themselves from the celebration of the Day of Victory. Instead, they want to celebrate the Day of Europe. How can you comment on that? You know, they distanced themselves not from the Victory Day, but from conscience. And I think they have such a distance between themselves and conscience, so I'm not sure they will be able to find it. It will be lost. At the same time, such things don't surprise us. Official Chisinau joined the narratives of the EU to rewrite history of Nazism and to praise collaborationists, and this includes the prohibition of everything to do with the Great Victory. Do you remember back in 2022 when the authorities in Moldova prohibited the St. George's ribbon and other symbols? They did it that ostensibly the symbols has something to do with symbols of the special military operation, and they do not support the operation. But now they're trying to wipe out the holiday itself. It's the holiday of the Moldovan people, of those veterans who paid with their lives for the victory for the future generations, for the life of future generations. It is their holiday that Sandu steals, and it has nothing to do with special military operation or Russia. It is connected to the fact that they destroy in a cynical way the population of Moldova. They do it politically and ideologically. They feel good about abusing their own veterans. What we're talking about now is only part of anti-national policy of the Sandu regime. It is aimed, globally speaking, to dismantle sovereignty, history, and national identity of the country. What for? She is the citizen of Romania. She renames the Moldovan language with the Romanian, and she enshrines all these changes by law. Now she has to forge a breach with Romania, and that's why they need to strip Moldova from its identity. And veterans are on their way to do so, because this but the Moldovan history won't work for Romania, and the Moldovan people has their own history. That's why the regime wants to wipe it out and to they want to the Moldovan people to become the victim of pro-Romanian policy. But this is not the only one fact that proves anti-national policy of Sandu. I'll give you several more examples. The authorities try to manipulate one of the most sensitive topic for the people. It is the it's religion. This is cynical. This is abuse of feelings of believers, of history, of the people of Moldova, and the Moldova saw it as abuse of feelings of believers. On April 20th, the Ministry of Justice published a post where Easter was called, I quote, a constitutional and useful for the public spirit. Probably I forgot to mention that it's April 20th, 2025. If someone thought that it happened some other time, this led to criticism. The post was deleted, but where's conscience? This demonstrates the logics of official Chisinau. Everything that contradicts the directives from Brussels will be wiped out. Some experts say that if it's necessary, Moldavians will be wiped out as well, because for Sandu, they are Romanian people. The European Moldova is of anti-Russian stance. On April 18th, the Moldovan media space saw information about the so-called about the social network called Matryoshka, ostensibly aimed at discrediting Moldavian authorities. There's no network discrediting Maya Sandu. She does it on her own. Residents hear the idea about the corrupt leadership, and no network should be established for that. Moldovan people see that no social networks impose them any ideas, but they only try to talk about topics they care. On their own TV channels. The policy of forced Europeization Moldova has always been part of the European continent. We know that everybody who is recruited by the Brussels bureaucracy can know no geography. And probably the Moldovans now will have to think that they have never been Europe, but they have always been. They cannot become even more European. But if they're talking about economy, then the EU should think about themselves first. According to the opinion poll, more than 40% of residents of the Republic see Russia as an important partner in economy and in security as well. The EU seen as such only by 29% respondents. And all of this takes place amid total wipeout of the media space, where there are only pro-Western media. And this pro-Western media receive huge money. They could probably make the Moldovan economy to reach a new level using this money. But Sandu won't be able to rewrite the people of Moldova into another category. We have always been friends, and we will always continue doing so. It's temporary, it's harmful, and it's anti-national what Sandu does. Thank you very much. Is Izvestia with us? Madam Zakharova, good afternoon. Katerina Pozharskaya, Izvestia. We have one question. Last week, the Parliament of Latvia endorsed a bill. The country withdraws from the Ottawa Treaty to prohibit anti-personnel mines. What the relevant initiatives of the European countries can testify to? According to the information that we have, the recent joint statements of the Baltic states and Poland about the withdrawal from the convention to ban the use, production of anti-personnel mine, the so-called Ottawa Convention, is aimed at development of interaction with producers from the USA. All of this is done for the interests of NATO. The place to organize of mass production of such armaments is the Baltic states and Poland. The money will be given through the EU, including the program Rearm Europe. The technical support will be ensured by the US. They plan to use the mine fields in the eastern wing of NATO and for the Ukrainian forces. They want the escalation on the European continent. They rewrite history and purpose so that no one from the current generation remembers what such ventures ended with in the past. The security of Europe cannot be built on the ruins of common sense. And landmine fields won't facilitate peace and cooperation. These fraught with harmful consequences for security on the European continent. They show their true selves as provocators. Thank you. Thanks to you, is LiveNews with us. Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. Good afternoon. I'm sorry, I have some technical issues, but I can hear and see you very well. Please ask your question. Just a second. Madam Zakharova, the Parliament of Lithuania prolonged until May 2026 national sanctions against Russians and Belarus people. The law now has one more provision providing for the permanent residency given to the citizen of Russia in Lithuania will be revoked if they establish that they went to Russia and Belarus more than once in the last 3 months. What can you say about it? Segregation on the nationality is a norm for them, not only in political life and social life, but it's their policy. They support Russophobia, and Vilnius imposes more limitations to the Russian-speaking population. Russia will strive for the condemnation of this practice, including at the relevant international platforms. Thank you very much. Thanks to you. Is Xinhua with us? Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. We have the following question for you. On April the 20th, marked the Day of the Chinese Language all over the world. In Russia hosted in many places dedicated events featuring traditional Chinese culture like calligraphy or shu. The public welcomed it with enthusiasm. Recently, more and more people in Russia is interested in the Chinese language and culture. What do you think about it? What do you think about the role that the education in Chinese plays in development of relations between our countries? You know, special place in Russia-China humanitarian cooperation is occupied by education, in particular, learning Russian and Chinese. One of the first, as you know, exchange years, thematic international projects, and it's become a good tradition, was dedicated to national languages. In 2009, we had the year of the Chinese language in Russia, and 2010 was the year of the year of the Chinese in Russia. We encourage mutual education in Russian and Chinese. This track is an important component of bilateral relation and plays an important role in strengthening confidence and friendship. As you said, the interest in Russia to the Chinese culture, literature is at a high level. More young people in China are interested in Russian. Now our countries play a leading role to preserve the world's stability, security, to preserve traditional values, the values of civilizations, to preserve historical memory. Our comprehensive partnership and strategic interaction prompts growing demand in personnel who knows Russian and Chinese. Specialists should ensure deeper cooperation between our countries. Young people who choose Russian and Chinese languages has a lot of prospects in future and possibilities for their careers. There's relevant work to create favorable conditions for cooperation between universities, academic mobility, exchange of experience in education in China. There's 29 joint educational facilities at Chinese universities. There's more than 100 educational programs where Russia participates. Russia-China Joint University in Shenzhen works. We share our position that it is important to preserve the national languages, and I'm sure that such days as the Day of the Chinese language and the Day of the Russian language that is going to be celebrated very soon on June 6th reminds about the importance of multi-language and cultural diversity. Our languages is not only part of our rich history and culture, national history and culture, but they are also official languages of the UN. That's why she speaks Chinese.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Is the Reuters agency with us? Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. Reuters is with you. We have two questions today related to Ukraine. Last Friday, the Bloomberg agency and this week another agency reported that the US proposed to their allies within the peaceful resolution of the Ukrainian conflict actual recognition of Russian control over Crimea and 4 territories that have entered Russia, the non-entrance of Ukraine into NATO and the alleviation of sanctions against Russia, and also sort of a alleviation when it comes to the demands of Moscow. Is Moscow ready to also take a step forward to reach these agreements? And if yes, then what will those conditions be? Of course, we could take a look at the history of this issue, but perhaps it shouldn't be me who voices these points, but let me recall that Sergei Lavrov, Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation, just last week gave an interview to the Commerce and newspaper where he gave a detailed description to this issue. And it's almost a year ago, in this very hall, the president of the Russian Federation voiced not just the Russian negotiations position, but Russia's basic approach to the situation around Ukraine and the security on the continent. And this would take a lot of time, so I would once again provide links in the text version of today's briefing, and I would like to recall that all of our approaches have been voiced by the President, by the Minister of Foreign Affairs in detail, and are reaffirmed constantly. So I believe that we should focus on today's reality in the way that the plans that have been presented at the mass media as leaks, as references to negotiations with diplomats, all of it as a complex, leaks or plans have been rejected by Zelensky. So why should we once again draw up some hypothetical scenarios when a person who is out of his mind if we can refer to him as a person, how, according to Bulgakov, dog's heart is, does not consent to it. He said that Kiev legally will not recognize the Russian status of Crimea. I don't even want to quote him on this. I just like to draw the logical conclusion that he once again showcased lack of political will for peace, lack of desire to make any compromise when it comes to settling conflict, and we should call it by its own name. He fully showcased inability to not just show any care, but empathy for his own citizens of Ukraine. I believe that is the main result of when we're addressing the current situation. He has no care for what happens to them. The only thing he cares about is his own political ambitions. Because if anyone says that, no, he is not just thinking about his political ambitions, but about the political future of Ukraine. But this is exactly the moment when this future of Ukraine could be formed, could be guaranteed, could be secured. But that is not what he seeks. People are nothing but material for him that he can use. His only interest is preserving his authority, his own sick ambitions, considering his abnormal state and everything that comes out of it. Once again, you've cited 2 or 3 sources. Unfortunately, these sources amount to hundreds, so it's useless to comment on them. Dialogue with the US side continues, as you've probably seen already. It's not simple. But at this stage, our countries aim to find long-term solutions. Both our leadership has affirmed this, and we receive similar signals from the other side. And once again, if you want to know about the status or the compromise, I will once again refer you to the statement of the Russian president on June 14th, 2024, and underscore that this is not just a request, it's our basic position on the issue. I'd like to recall that the residents of the region that you've just mentioned have fully implemented the right on self-determination of the peoples. So we should just operate on the realities, base it on the international law and the situation on the ground. How many years were we presented that everything should be decided, and it will be decided? These are the facts. I believe that this is what the basis should be for our actions. And the second question, if you allow. As for the elimination of threats and the root causes of the conflicts, once again, I would like to underscore, I will not go back to it. It has already been voiced out by the minister, Sergei Lavrov, in his interview to the Kommersant newspaper, but on mass scale, we repeat it constantly, but once again, it was done to this news agency. And the second question, once again, has to do with Ukraine. Russia continuously speaks against Ukraine's membership in NATO, citing it as one of the root causes of the conflict. One is Moscow's position right now about Ukraine's membership in the European Union. Why are you so concerned about membership? Perhaps you should think about just the member, whether it is a potential or current one. I mean, Ukraine is not in its best state. Where does this thriving come from? Just take a look at what's happening in Ukraine. And secondly, I think that the West is the guarantor of preserving the well-being of Ukraine. These are the statements that were given. These promises, public promises, were made. The collective West should answer to the Ukrainian people what exactly they've pulled Ukraine into, what exactly has turned into the guarantees were given that Ukraine will be a prosperous country. Perhaps they should answer these questions for the Ukrainians. But it's another important point when you speak of the European Union. They don't even hide the fact that they've changed, and it came with the change in their name. Although we could suppose that there was a certain political component in it when the European Economic Union just turned into European Union by taking economy out of the name and out of the list of their priorities. Just take a look at what the European Union is doing. First of all, they're dealing with politics. The economics have been pushed aside. It not only longer serves the politics, it's being targeted, it's being bribed. And what remains of the economic component? It's the economic component that doesn't deal with minimizing the damages of the European Union, but it has to do with gathering financial support for the very same Kiev regime in order to, once again, if we go back to the politics as the dominant area for the European Union, to once again influence the situation in the region, on the continent, and so on. More and more in recent years, even until 2022, the EU and it's trying to turn into one of the NATO departments, and now we see it in practice as well when the NATO is using the EU as a wallet, as a chance to use financial flows under the guise of so-called assistance just to mobilize the economies of the EU member states in order to serve the aggressive policy and the aggressive ideology of NATO. So we draw subsequent conclusions out of that as well. If that is all, is the Chinese Media Corporation with us? Yes, good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. We have one question. According to the latest public poll, shows that the negative approach of the US towards China for the first time has gone down in 5 years, which could deal with the change of number of users on the Chinese social media, as well as streamings of American online stars. They show that the tax policy of the US president will not harm the interests of the US. What is your opinion? Is the tax policy thus reduced to nothing? You see, in this case, I would like not to base my answer on the economical figures, but on the informational issue. The xenophobia, you see, there is the lowered negative attitude towards China from the US. That is what xenophobia really is, which is now changing for the better. It's now becoming less aggressive. And the Americans are less engaged in their negative approach towards China. But you should remember that those weren't natural processes when you could suppose it had to do with a negative role of China towards the US, which wasn't the case. Historical phobias or the impossibility to resolve any issues that came from the past or arose in the present. No, this xenophobia was created. It was slowly formed, just like Russophobia and just like their attitude towards other countries. If you think that towards their allies, the US allies are not able to form these phobias, you're wrong. I've provided several examples and I will do it once again. Whereas France, exerting their independent foreign policy, refused to join the US track of occupying Iraq, denouncing its authorities and destroying its statehood. France was referred to as a scarecrow. It was appointed as a scarecrow by the US. And then they waged a full information war against France and the French people. It was disgusting and terrible when, during the American talk shows, they should change the name of the French fries. Because in the US, they use such a word, French fries. And it wasn't just a joke. They had a real discussion that perhaps after everything that's been going on, because France dared simply to refuse to violate the international law, just stop using words that have to do with French culture, French language, the issue of French films on the US territory. They mocked the French. You see, these are artificially created negative attitude of one or other nation, of a single country. I can still recall how disgustingly certain circles or elites behaved when it came to Kazakhstan. When on the US territory, they had a movie not just mocking, but belittling Kazakhstan and its culture, which truly was just an amalgamation of shameful, insane attitude to a number of nations under mottos using some memes, and nobody could do a single thing. It was just a wave of insanity. It was disgusting. Because all the cinemas in the US were plastered with such posters and nobody could do a single thing, because this was referred to as freedom of speech, freedom of self-expression. So these are all artificial things that appear to be well paid, well directed for certain purposes, either to create conditions for negotiations or to disrupt economical plans or projects, exert some kind of pressure. So first and foremost, we should remember that here we talk about shameful wave of information campaigns against people of different nations, of different ethnical groups, who are citizens of different countries, who unfortunately for the collective West, for them this is just normal behavior. Is the IRNA news agency with us?
Let me ask my question in English.
Sure.
Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi told RT that Tehran is ready to expand trilateral discussions among Iran, Russia, and China to other issues, including non-nuclear ship issues. Could you explain the Russian Foreign Ministry's view on this proposal, please? Thanks.
Я напомню, что между Москвой и...
I would like to recall that between Moscow and Tehran, between Russia and Iran, we conduct constant coordination on a number of international issues of mutual interest. First of all, it has to do with cooperation with the UN, with many other organizations on international platforms, including BRICS and SCO. We regularly agree on our approaches on regional issues, projects of cooperation, prospective areas of mutual efforts of Moscow, Beijing, and Tehran in order to effectively form a secure infrastructure of multipolar world to preserve international global development and overcome relevant challenges that the world is facing. We operate based on the interest of our three countries in slow amalgamation of and holding of consultations that are continuing on different levels between the capitals, between the relevant forums, where Russia, China, and Iran are participating. If that is all, then the next question is the news front with us. Yes, good afternoon. We only have one question. You've already referred to it, but about a single event. Recently, there was a massive event among the Japanese political leadership, including 70 members of parliament. And neighboring states reacted very negatively. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Korea has published strict commentary towards it. How could you comment on this event? You see, today we've already spoken about the Japanese militaries, and the Church of Yasukuni is the odious symbol of the Japanese militarism, where, among others, they're glorifying the war criminals of Class A who were sentenced to death after the ruling of the International Tribunal for the Far East. As far as we know, on April 21st, Prime Minister Siba and heads of both chambers of parliament and 2 members of the minister chambers have sent their address to the church, and we resolutely denounce these actions and this practice that in the year of the 80th anniversary of the victory in the Second World War is ridiculous. We have repeatedly stated that Tokyo is hurting the feelings of the neighboring people who have fell victim to this barbarian expansionist campaign that was conducted by the Japanese authorities, and these actions demonstrate the true nature of the current course of Japanese authorities to conduct a speedy remilitarization. At the basis of it is their inability to claim responsibility for the aggression that they have instigated, and lack of sincere regret. We once again ask them to stop trying to rewrite pages of the human history and fully admit the end of the Second World War.
Is Moscow Post with us? Yes, good afternoon. We have one question today. There have been reports that Russia is working on the establishment of international financial settlement system based on the gold parity. How do Russian BRICS partners consider the possibility of establishing a single currency that will be insured by the gold? In the context of fragmentation of world economy, our key goal is to put in place conditions for sustainable development of economies of our countries. The new geopolitical reality dictates the need to elaborate effective measures and further steps in order to enhance financial and economic cooperation. You see, the de-dollarization, which is obviously getting a global trend right now, was declared by the U.S. administration under Biden. Not countries were abandoning dollar in their mutual settlements. It was Biden administration itself that cut off countries from the possibility to use dollar for financial transactions. It sounds absurd, and the current U.S. administration is pointing to this fact, but it was Biden administration that set the tone. I don't know if they try to consider the consequences, but they promoted de-dollarization and encouraged it themselves. I did carefully follow the statements by the Russian leadership on this topic. There have been statements during the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, and Russia never abandoned this instrument. But when we were simply cut off from it, when we were blocked, and it was done in an eager manner by the representatives of the US Biden administration. Then, in order to live on, in order to conduct financial transactions, we had to turn to different mechanisms. So it was Biden and US liberal elites who initiated it. So now we are working on it. Due to the lack of trust to the financial mechanisms established by Western countries. Judging by how Western countries themselves are applying these mechanisms, in this context, not only BRICS countries, but other countries as well, are seeking to establish reliable systems which would guarantee and protect them from the shocks that, in particular, were created by liberal Democrats in the US. The main focus is now on putting in place conditions for the wide application of national currencies in mutual financial settlements. It is not an easy task. The structural reform of a global financial system is not a problem that could be solved overnight. However, all countries of our union are willing to achieve practical results and are ready to enhance cooperation in this field. We need some pillars. We need a foundation in order to continue the normal life in a situation that was produced by the Biden administration. So we are working on creating a new financial transaction system. It was reflected in the Kazan Declaration that was adopted at the BRICS summit that took place in October 2024. That document lists a number of specific projects, including the cross-border payment initiative, establishment of clearing infrastructure and a reassurance company, as well as a new investment platform. These ideas aimed at creating favorable conditions for enhancing trade volumes and investments among the BRICS countries. We hope the work will be continued by the Brazilian chairship. Thank you. Is Newsroom here with us? Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. My name is Mikhail Rosen. We have one question. According to media reports, Consul General of Russia in Gyumri, Mr. Igor Titov, visited the local office of the opposition bloc Mother Armenia. Is this information reliable, and is Russia ready to develop relations not only with the government but also with other political forces of Armenia? The meeting you are talking about is an inevitable part of daily work of leaders of our diplomatic missions. Russian diplomats engage with the entire range of political forces in the country in order to promote bilateral relations on different tracks. In the case you've mentioned, His Excellency Mr. Igor Titov, on the eve of celebrations of the great victory, invited heads of all political leader forces to participate in the reception that will take place in the Consulate General. They discussed the development of cultural ties between municipalities of this consular district with Russian partners. There is no internal political context, so everything is on the surface, and it corresponds with the goals of the diplomatic mission. Thank you. Is Great Asia here with us? Yes, good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. We have one question today. During the past week, there have been three high-ranking visits of three high-ranking delegations from the Middle East in Moscow. First, the Russian capital was visited by Minister of Foreign Affairs of Iran, Mr. Abbas Araghchi, and he handed over a personal message by Ayatollah Khamenei. Then Emir of Qatar visited Moscow and met President Putin And then Omani Sultan visited Moscow. Does it mean that Russia is a strategic partner of Iran, serves as a key strategic mediating dialogue between Washington and Tehran in the context of settlement the nuclear issue? Well, Russia is taking active measures and taking steps in order to prevent deterioration of the situation around the nuclear program of Iran. We've been consistent on this track. We categorically reject any attempts of certain countries to try to resolve the problems with the use of force, and we warn all those who are thinking of it to refrain from this step, which would deteriorate the situation in the entire region. We believe all reasonable neighbors of Iran, including the countries of the Persian Gulf, understand it just the same. We want to see that the escalation fueled by the West does not turn into a hot phase, but is mitigated by means of agreements which would take into account the legitimate rights and eliminating the concerns of all countries involved. There are regular discussions with Tehran. This topic is also present in our dialogue with many other countries, including Qatar and Oman that you've mentioned. The Russian side supports the efforts of Muscat to establish indirect dialogue between the negotiating teams of Iran and the US. Our bilateral relations with Iran and other international partners are not limited to one single goal, as you definitely understand. The agenda is much deeper. There have been negotiations in Moscow, as you know. They were covered in media reports, and there was a press conference. The relations based on multifaceted trade, economic, scientific, technical, cultural, humanitarian, and other cooperation projects that are being developed in a dynamic manner and meet national interests of both countries. Let me once again refer you to the press conference. Thank you so much. Is Zvezda here with us? Yes, good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. Zvezda TV channel. Unfortunately, there was another sad news. After an attack by Ukrainian armed forces on the 24th of April, our correspondent Nikita Goltin was killed. He was a young man. It was for an entire month that doctors tried to save his life, but unfortunately he passed away. How would you comment this ongoing hunting by the Kyiv regime against Russian journalists? Well, first of all, we express deep condolences to the family and the relatives of the journalist. Today we received the news that in the military hospital, the journalist, the military correspondent of the Zvezda TV channel passed away. It was for over a month that doctors tried to save his life, but unfortunately the wounds, the injuries were too hard. Let me remind you that together with the cameraman Andrei Panov and the driver Alexander Vakelis, he was the fourth victim of the attacks with the use of US-produced HIMARS missiles. It was a targeted attack against a car with Russian journalists, and Ukrainians spent 2 costly missiles in this attack. This was a terrorist attack. It can't be defined in any other way. These inhuman, they knew full well whom they were targeting. They knew they were targeting journalists. Let me remind you, since the beginning of this year, as a result of targeted attacks, 5 journalists were killed: Alexander Martinyanov, Alexander Darchok, Andrei Panov, Anna Prokofyeva, and today, right now, this day, It was Nikita Golden who passed away. Many journalists were wounded or injured. Maxim Romanenko, Mikhail Kiev, Svetlana Larna, Isabella Lieberman, Yuri Shomov, and Mikhail Skurodov, Dmitry Volkov. On the whole, the victims of terrorist attacks are counted in dozens. Just think of it. It's not statistics. It's not statistics of a decade. I'm talking about just the past months or several years. All these tragedies are not a result of an incidental attack. They are the victims of targeted, deliberate attacks. The Ukrainian army is hunting journalists. They trace them and they use all the weapons at their disposal to do so. They do so not only on the front line, they do so amid peaceful cities. Think of Dugina, think of Vladlen Tatarsky. And will now allow that these crimes remain unpunished. As you know, our prosecutor's office tries to do everything possible in order to bring the perpetrators to justice, and we as NMFA will try to make sure that international bodies, international organizations qualify these terrorist attacks as such. I'm talking about the High Commissar, the UN bodies, and the OSCE bodies will raise these issues at all platforms and will raise awareness of the international community. In the context of the Day of Freedom of Press that will be celebrated on the 3rd of May, we'll raise this topic at the UN General Assembly that will take place starting from the 28th of April, and immediate perpetrators and those in the President's office in Kiev who make such practice a daily routine should be aware that they will be brought to justice. Many would ask us, well, this wouldn't bring the children back to their mothers, then why talk about it? Not only shall we talk about it, but we should present evidence at all international platforms, because we write their names down in history, and unless we speak about it, if just for a day, just for one single day, we reduce the speed of our work, that will be crossed out of history, and their names will be forgotten. But our diplomats continue their work, our missions to international organizations, our permanent representatives, our ambassadors, our diplomatic and consular workers will not make this happen. We present exhibitions, we disseminate reports, we do everything that we can to make sure that our journalists have the opportunity to participate personally in international conferences. Regularly, do we speak about the history of our domestic journalism that is now fighting these information fakes, not only in theory, by providing conferences, shall we debate about countering the lies and disinformation, but it should be done in a way that as our journalists do so, and information about their historic deeds, about their tragic and very hard work will be presented to the international community. We will do so using all possible ways at our disposal, and we will reflect it in the documents of international organizations. Thank you. Is Anna Dolu here with us? Yes, good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. Today we have two questions, if we may. How could you comment on statement by the Yemeni Houthi movement that due to the increasing number of attacks by the US, civilians are dying, while our assessments of the large-scale military operation launched by the US against the Yemeni movement Ansarullah are well known. They are formulated in the media press release following the phone conversation between Mr. Lavrov and Marco Rubio of the 15th of March. I'll reiterate, Russian side believes there should be an immediate stop of violence and all parties are involved to show restraint and refrain from any attacks which could deteriorate the situation, lead to escalation and expansion of military confrontation. We believe that long-term stabilization in this region of the world and lasting settlement of the protracted Yemeni crisis is possible through negotiations aimed at elaboration of compromise solutions with the due consideration for legitimate interests of all leading Yemeni political forces, including Ansar Allah movement. Now, as for the strikes of the U.S. armed forces against the oil terminal in Ras Issa, on the 18th of April, according to most recent reports, they claimed lives of more than 80 and injured over 230 people. We believe it was impermissible and unjustified. I'd like to refer to the statement by the UN Secretary General, Mr. Guterres, of the 19th of April. He expressed his concern by the U.S. attacks against Ras Issa, which claimed multiple victims among civilians. He noted that 5 humanitarian workers were injured. He pointed to the fact that port infrastructure was strongly damaged, and he expressed concern that waters could be contaminated due to the oil leak. In coordination with our regional partners, including Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Oman, and Iran, will continue our efforts in order to see speedy normalization of the situation in Yemen and around it.
Thank you very much. Question 2. It's about Iranian nuclear deal. Foreign Minister of Russia Sergei Lavrov said that Moscow is prepared to facilitate US and Iran to restore nuclear deal. How does Russia see its role in this process? What could it do in this direction? I already commented on it today. I said that a detailed commentary was given following negotiations during joint press conference. All links will be given in the text of the briefing of April the 9th. Among others, Russia is prepared to facilitate this issue on the basis of the agreed upon agreements. Good afternoon, author E. We have 2 questions. This Scandinavian countries, Finland, Denmark, Norway, are militarized at the record rate. They procure armaments. We are not asking why they are doing so, but I would like to ask what the Foreign Ministry does to eliminate the risks that we see in future. I commented this topic as well today in the context of NATO destructive efforts. I talked about Northern Europe a lot. Russia closely follow the military preparations of Europeans, including the countries of Northern Europe, as well as integration of Finland and Sweden into NATO. These processes were active long before the special military operation, and these countries joining NATO, they were only covered by the special military operation. Even before that, we said that they plan that they overlap their military plans and so on, and we draw relevant conclusions from that. The decision to join NATO in Helsinki and Stockholm was taken by the authorities of the countries full of Russophobe complexes without comprehensive consultations with their own public, with the pressure from the outside. they don't criticize their own referenda because they don't hold any. This decision cannot be cannot be reasonable, and these actions of one's good neighbors. Russia will use everything we can to ensure our security and defense. Many decisions were declared, and they are consistently implemented. As to the diplomatic efforts in this direction, we doubt that military and political leadership of many Western countries to adequately understand the signals that we sent about inadmissibility and danger to escalate situation in the Baltic and Arctic regions, because we hear, as I said on the example of President Stubb, an inconsistent narrative. He contradicts himself. To use diplomatic tools, it is important all the signals to be to be said and understood. But Helsinki, Copenhagen, and other capitals refused this. They want to strategically defeat Russia. And as to diplomatic signals, it is absolutely clear that those who have of the receivers only want aggression from Brussels and London, and they also receive signals from Washington. But now they falter. I don't know what to do. Probably it's temporary. Let's see what will happen in future. This means the loss of common sense and their own sovereignty. Until this paradigm changes, the prospects for diplomatic dialogue with Northern European countries isn't impossible, but not because of us. We have always been prepared for the dialogue, but they have something wrong with the radars. Question 2. The representative of the Georgian party, Georgian Dream, said that Georgia by 2030 will be fully prepared and will join the EU. How can you comment it? Or will this change relations between our countries? You know, the main point is everyone who aspires to join the EU by 2030 has something to join. Great Britain wouldn't withdraw from anything good. When there's something to benefit from, when there's potential, the British will be the first ones, but they were the first to withdraw from the EU, and it's clear why. Because the crisis within the EU is so clear, and their potential is almost depleted. No one wants to do anything with it, especially those who care about their national economies. Georgia and us have talked about it many times. Despite political differences and lack of diplomatic relations, we built bilateral ties in a mutually beneficial way. There's dialogue on this track. We want to intensify our cooperation and normalize the relation which reflects the interests of both Russian and Georgian peoples. We shall bet in practice both our aspiration and our goodwill, our wish. But those who see the EU and joining EU should care about not only mottos, but about figures and statistics. They should see if there's anything there. Thanks to you. Is Lantaru with us? Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. We would like to ask only one question. On April 21st, the New York Post, citing the sources in the White House, said that Ukraine can agree to Russia's conditions. What can Russia say about the Kiev regime? Debunked that. We shouldn't go back to this topic. The question is, both de jure or de facto, the Kiev regime is unable to negotiate. That is it. Let's continue. Is Vmeste a newspaper with us? Oh, good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. On the territory of the EU, the information about Russia is terrible. There's no truth about Russia. And a powerful argument for Russia would be statistics about resettlement back to Russia, not only compatriots of Soviet Germans, but also Germans who were born there. And there are different figures, but can you give some kind of official statistics? This statistics from 2006 include 1.2 million people. Those are people from more than 50 countries, including Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Ukraine, Germany, the US. If we're talking about Germany, in the recent 5 years, in the last 5 years, 15,000 ethnic Germans moved to Russia. In 2024, within the program, more than 30,000 people came to Russia. 1.8 thousand people came from the EU. As to repatriates, there's different statistics, and they have different legal basis for resettlement. Different laws regulate them. If we talk about those who come back to the motherland, it's a special category. 3,000 people in 2024 received received the right to go back. 1.8 thousand of them are already in Moscow. They can live in any region, including Moscow and St. Petersburg. We're not talking about labor migration. We're not talking about refugees and political migrants. We're talking only about these categories, veterans and compatriots. They participate in the program of the resettlement of compatriots. Why the leading Western newspapers don't publish this information? Because they debunk the myth about the barbaric Russia. Everyone who wants come to us, those who want they leave, those who want they come back. But amid all this, we receive people from various countries. I gave you figures. But why they do so? Everyone has their own reasons. Sometimes they feel closeness to the history of the country. Sometimes they care about future and prospects. Some people want to develop business that has no future in their own countries. Some come to preserve their identity because they don't want their children to be called it or quadrobus. Some come for their own reasons and ideas. Probably they have dreamt about it for all their life, or they see their lives in the countries of the collective West, for example. We don't see anything to lure them here. We don't show them beautiful pictures. We just answer the demands. We even introduce new categories to the program. Those who are not repatriants or compatriots, they are citizens of their own countries, but they want to preserve their religion, faith, or traditional values. Now we have this category as well, and our government structure